I never imagined a serene airport lounge would become the very place. That utterly shattered every belief I held about family. My name is Elena Foster, and for the majority of my life, I embodied the ideal daughter, obedient, composed, essentially invisible. But on that pivotal day, as we were supposedly heading to South Africa for a family vacation, I witnessed my father bend down, pat Grandpa's shoulder, and calmly instruct, "Just sit right here. We'll go check in and be right back." They walked away, calm, resolute, but something deeply unsettling lingered. Minutes turned into 20, then 30, and that's when the horrifying realization struck me. They weren't coming back. My grandfather, disoriented, fragile, already succumbing to the encroaching fog of Alzheimer's, was being abandoned right there, in the bustling terminal, left like unclaimed luggage. I didn't pause to think. I simply ran. And what I encountered, when I finally reached him, irrevocably altered everything I thought I understood about love, about loyalty, and about the true essence of belonging. The perfect Fawada growing up in Omaha, Nebraska, my life, from an outsider's perspective, appeared flawless. A two-story colonial house with pristine white shutters, a meticulously manicured lawn. My father, Dr. Leonard Foster, was a highly respected cardiologist who preferred his shirts impeccably starched, and his children quieter than the sophisticated machinery in his hospital wing. My mother, Patricia, maintained the home, though not with a focus on nurturing. She organized charity fundraisers, baked elaborate treats for school galas, and frequently reiterated that presentation is paramount. I was their eldest child, the conscientious one, the straightest student whose perfectly combed hair and piano competition ribbons were displayed above her bed like coveted military honors. Every family photograph depicted us smiling. Yet, no one ever noticed how tightly I always clasped my hands, as if instinctively bracing for an unseen impact. In our household, love was never verbally expressed. It was quantified by achievement, by silence, by how adeptly you conformed. But Grandpa, William, was different. He was the sole person who ever whispered to me, "You don't need to earn love, Elena. Just be." Every Sunday during my childhood, he would take me to the local park while my parents attended their exclusive social club. We delight in feeding the ducks and immerse ourselves in books beneath the majestic elm tree. By the lake, he affectionately called me Lainey, a special nickname no one else was permitted to use. I can still vividly recall his hands, calloused from decades as a high school shop teacher, yet always steady as he meticulously turned the pages of The Wind in the Willows for me. As I matured, these cherished visits became less frequent. Dad explained that Grandpa was becoming slower and more confused. Eventually, those comforting Sundays ceased entirely. He was relocated to the upstairs guest room, effectively out of sight, out of the way. However, I would surreptitiously visit him sometimes, particularly during high school final exams when the relentless pressure of perfection made me feel utterly suffocated. Grandpa never inquired about my grades. He simply smiled and gently asked, "Tell me something beautiful you observed today," and I invariably had something to share. He remembered the small, intimate details, even as he began forgetting more significant ones. Initially, it was innocuous, calling me Lainey 3 times consecutively, as if surprised by my continued presence. Then he would become ensnared in narratives from the past, repeating the same phrase as if it were entirely new. My father grew visibly irritated. My mother began referring to him in the past tense, even while he was physically present in the room. But to me, he remained Grandpa, still the man who had taught me to gaze at the sky and perceive far more than just the weather. And that is why, When Dad announced we would all embark on a trip together to create memories before things worsened, I desperately wanted to believe him, even as a subtle whisper deep inside me warned, no one creates memories by abandoning someone. The seeds of doubt before the onset of profound forgetting. Grandpa was the singular person who remembered everything. That genuinely mattered. He recalled that I despised chocolate milk but adored strawberry. He remembered my favorite bedtime stories, the subtle hum I made when nervous, and the poignant fact that my middle name honored his mother, not my mom's, regardless of how many times she attempted to claim otherwise. He never truly forgot me. Even as Alzheimer's began its cruel erosion of his sense of time and place. Even when he mingled names and dates, somehow, inexplicably, he still looked at me as if I were his home. The first instance he forgot his location, I was 16. I discovered him standing in the driveway, clad only in slippers, clutching a watering can. It was February. Snow blanketed everything. He believed he was back in Alabama, tending roses with Grandma before her passing. When I gently took his hand, he blinked and softly inquired, "Lainey, am I dreaming?" I offered a strained smile through the stinging sensation in my chest. "No, Grandpa, you're simply remembering." My parents treated it as a temporary phase. They whispered hushed words like facility and nursing wing late at night. But I couldn't bear the thought of him being alone among strangers. Who wouldn't know he hummed old jazz tunes when anxious? Or that he meticulously stirred his tea precisely 3 times before taking a sip. So, I became the one who sat beside him in the evenings, reading aloud from the very books he once read to me. The Secret Garden, The Wind in the Willows, Charlotte's Web. He couldn't always follow the narratives, but occasionally, his eyes would ignite as if he had just unlocked a long-sealed door. These moments were rare and immensely precious, but their frequency waned. One summer afternoon, we were seated in the backyard beneath the expansive maple tree. I had just graduated high school. My parents were hosting a celebratory party inside. I didn't desire champagne. I desired Grandpa's presence. He looked at me that day, his eyes clearer than they had been in weeks, and quietly stated, "Lainey, when they cease to see me, promise me you won't." I froze. I could never stop seeing you. He nodded, placing his hand gently over mine. Then, when the moment arrives, you'll know exactly what to do. I didn't comprehend his words then, but those phrases lodged themselves deep within me, like a tiny ember, patiently waiting for the day I would need to recall them. And that day arrived at the airport. The fading figure after my first year of college. Everything at home felt inexplicably rearranged. The guest room, where Grandpa stayed, was now routinely locked during the daytime. Mom claimed it was for his safety. Dad insisted he required undisturbed rest. But I couldn't help but notice how the hallway remained eerily quiet now. How they no longer invited him downstairs for dinner. How they ceased correcting people when they mistakenly assumed Grandpa no longer resided with us. He was slowly fading from the family's consciousness, much like an old photograph left exposed to harsh sunlight. I resisted in the only ways available to me. I left heartfelt notes for Grandpa on his nightstand, surreptitiously brought him his favorite lemon cookies from the bakery near campus, and sat beside him for extended periods. Even if he merely stared out the window and called me Rose, his late sister's name. But what inflicted the deepest pain wasn't his diminishing memory, it was theirs. One afternoon, I overheard my dad conversing on the phone. "Yes, I know the lawyer said she'll need to co-sign, but she's just a kid. We'll handle it." He was referring to me. I waited until he exited the room, then tiptoed in and cautiously peeked at the papers spread across the counter. Medical directives, estate planning documents. They weren't just preparing for Grandpa's decline. They were meticulously preparing to transfer all assets away from him and away from me. That night, I confronted them directly. "He still recognizes me," I asserted, my voice taut. "He still smiles when I read to him. He still laughs when I burn toast. He's still here." Mom didn't lift her gaze from the laundry. She was folding. "Elena, you're too emotional. You've always been overly attached." Dad sighed. "Do you truly believe love is enough? It isn't. We are doing what is responsible." "Responsible?" I retorted, my voice sharp. "You mean convenient?" That comment was met with an immediate, chilling silence, followed by coldness. From that moment onward, they excluded me from every discussion concerning Grandpa's care. I returned home from campus one weekend to discover they had relocated his books, discarded his familiar slippers, and replaced the beloved tea kettle he cherished. Minimalism, Mom declared brightly. But to me, it felt like an erasure. Then came the startling announcement. "We're going to South Africa," Dad announced at dinner one evening. A complete family trip. One final memory together. His smile seemed unnaturally wide, his eyes excessively guarded. I glanced at Grandpa, sitting quietly beside me, his fingers tracing an invisible rhythm on the table. He appeared oblivious to the conversation, but when I leaned close and whispered, "Do you want to go on an adventure?" he looked at me and winked. It was a subtle gesture, but it was unmistakably him. And so, I agreed to the trip, not because I believed their pretense, but because something deep within me signaled that this was not merely a vacation. It was a test, and I needed to be present, just in case they failed it. The airport betrayal would departed for the airport just before sunrise. The sky was still bleeding hues of orange, and the air carried the faint sense of dew and jet fuel as we loaded the car. Grandpa wore his favorite navy cardigan, his travel sweater. As he called, it buttoned incorrectly and with sleeves too long. He clutched a framed photograph of Grandma in one hand and my wrist in the other. Dad constantly checked his watch. Mom meticulously checked her reflection. I, meanwhile, kept my gaze fixed on Grandpa's eyes, searching for any indication that he was truly with us. In the back seat, I softly whispered, "Are you excited, Grandpa?" He didn't respond, merely stared out the window and hummed a tune I almost recognized, perhaps an old military march, perhaps a lullaby. I gently squeezed his hand. "We're going somewhere warm. Elephants, remember?" He looked at me then and murmured softly, "You'll make an excellent teacher someday, Rose." I didn't correct him. He always referred to me as Rose when he felt scared. At the airport, the lines stretched long, the atmosphere thrummed with a cacophony of noise and harsh fluorescent light. Mom pulled me aside. "Elena, go fetch coffee for your father and me. Something potent." I glanced at Grandpa. "What about him?" "He's perfectly fine," she asserted, already walking away. "We'll be right back." Dad escorted Grandpa to a chair in the quietest corner of the terminal, a row of seats near a frosted window overlooking the tarmac. Grandpa sat obediently, still, clutching Grandma's photograph. My father leaned over him and stated clearly and deliberately, "Just sit here. We'll go check in and be right back." The words resonated in my mind like a stone plummeting into a deep well. I stood frozen, the coffee order half formed on my lips. My parents walked away, towards the departure gate, calm, self-assured, never once glancing back. And something felt profoundly wrong. I watched their retreating figures until they vanished around the bend. 5 minutes elapsed, then 10. Grandpa remained there, patiently waiting, still tracing the edge of the photo frame with his thumb. 15 minutes. My heart pounded, relentlessly. 20. A chilling sensation settled in my gut. I approached the check-in kiosk. Has the Foster party checked in for their flight? The woman behind the desk typed, "Yes, checked in and cleared." My breath hitched. "All of them?" She nodded, then added, "Boarding should commence in approximately 20 minutes. I recoiled, numb. They weren't coming back. They had no intention of ever returning. 100 feet away, my grandfather sat utterly alone amidst a sea of strangers. He didn't comprehend what was happening. He didn't know where he was. He only knew they had instructed him to wait for us, and so he waited, because that is what loyal individuals do. I began walking, then running, pushing through the dense crowds, my throat constricted. I had always believed betrayal would be allowed. Dramatic affair slamming doors screamed accusations. But betrayal, I learned, is often quiet. It simply walks away calmly, even as you are still smiling. I don't recall consciously deciding to run. My body simply propelled itself. The clatter of luggage wheels and the announcements of boarding calls faded into an indistinct static as I sprinted back towards the tranquil corner where Grandpa sat. I saw him there, still in the same chair, his shoulders slumped, his eyes scanning the crowd like a bewildered child waiting for a parent who had forgotten them. "Grandpa," I gasped, dropping to my knees before him. "It's me. It's Elena." His eyes flickered with recognition, then confusion. "Rose," he whispered, his voice dry. "It's all right," I reassured him, holding his hands, which had grown cold. "I'm here. You're not alone." He looked around, utterly bewildered. "Where did your father go?" "He said he'd return right away." "Am I supposed to go somewhere?" My throat tightened painfully. "No. You're supposed to stay with me. That's all." He gripped my hands tighter, trembling. I was so frightened, Lainey. I didn't know what to do. I yearned to scream, not at him, at the individuals who had departed so effortlessly, who had meticulously packed their passports and printed their boarding passes and reconciled themselves with abandoning the man who had once carried them on his shoulders, who had taught them to fish, who had stayed awake when they suffered nightmares, and who had paid for their very first automobiles. I stood and gently helped him to his feet. "Come on, Grandpa. We're leaving." He hesitated, gazing down the terminal towards the gates. "Aren't we going on a trip?" "Yes," I confirmed, wrapping his scarf securely around his neck. "But not the one they planned." A new path as we walked towards the exit. I heard my name, Elena. I turned. Mom stood by the escalator, her heels clicking sharply against the tile, mascara smudged, phone still clutched in her hand. Dad stood behind her, rigid, silent. "Elena, get back here now." I tightened my grip on Grandpa's hand. "He doesn't even know where he is," Mom snapped, her voice escalating. "He requires professional care. You have no idea what you're doing." "I know precisely what I'm doing," I asserted. "I am not abandoning him like discarded luggage in a waiting room." Dad finally spoke, his voice low, sharp. "You're creating a scene. Consider how this looks." "How it looks?" I laughed bitterly. "He's your father." They froze for a moment. We all stood in tense silence, the low hum of the terminal pressing in. Then I uttered the words, "You left him." I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply stated it, like a final verdict. Mom's lips parted, but no words escaped. I stepped back. "We're done here, Elena. If you walk away," Dad began, but I did. I walked out of the terminal into the crisp morning light, my coat barely encompassing both of us. I hailed the first taxi I spotted and gently helped Grandpa inside, his hands still trembling. We drove for miles in profound silence, the airport shrinking behind us like a fading nightmare. It was only when we reached the bus station that I finally exhaled. "Where are we headed?" Grandpa gently inquired, his eyes cloudy. I retrieved my phone, scrolled through my messages, and located the contact I had saved weeks ago. The one I never anticipated needing to use. June Harmon, my grandfather's younger sister. My great-aunt, the only person in our family who still sent birthday cards with heartfelt handwritten notes. She resided on a small property in Kansas and had called me a few months prior, expressing concern for Grandpa. "If anything ever happens, Elena, you call me," she had urged. "Don't let them tuck him away." I called. She answered on the second ring. "June, it's Elena. Grandpa needs you." "We need you." Her voice broke. "Tell me where you are. I'll be waiting." I purchased 2 bus tickets for the next departure. The station was nearly deserted. I guided Grandpa to a seat, wrapped him in my scarf, and allowed his head to rest on my shoulder. He drifted into sleep before the bus engine rumbled to life. We rode into the sunrise, passing endless fields, towering telephone poles, and sleepy towns. I observed the landscape transform, but I no longer felt lost. We were journeying somewhere we would be truly seen, somewhere we would belong. For the very first time in my life, I wasn't merely following my parents' directives. I was making a conscious choice, and that choice, though initially terrifying, felt profoundly like coming home. The quiet homecoming bus pulled into the tiny station in Holton, Kansas, just after noon. It was quiet, almost eerily so after the chaotic blur of terminals and rumbling engines. But I welcomed the profound stillness. Standing on the platform was a small, resilient woman in a denim jacket, her silver hair neatly pulled back, holding a cardboard sign that read, "William plus Elena" in shaky black marker. "June Harmon." She dropped the sign the moment her eyes met ours. "Oh, Billy," she gasped, rushing forward. Grandpa blinked at her, then offered a smile with more recognition than I had dared to expect. "Junebug," he murmured. Weakly, she laughed. Through her tears. "Still recall that?" He reached for her hand. "You've grown old." "And you haven't," she playfully teased, wrapping him in a hug that caused something deep within me to finally release. For the first time in days, I exhaled. The breath I hadn't realized I was holding. We drove down quiet 2-lane roads flanked by vast, open fields. Her house stood at the edge of town, a modest 2-bedroom dwelling with charmingly chipped white paint and a broad porch that seemed to hold decades of untold stories. There was no formal plan, no intake forms, no discussion of burden, just comforting warm soup, fresh clean sheets, and a type of silence that enveloped you like a soft quilt, distinctly unlike the cold silence I knew from my childhood home. That first night, I sat on the porch while Grandpa peacefully napped inside. June brought out 2 steaming mugs of tea and sat beside me, her joints creaking softly like the old rocking chair. "You did the right thing," she stated quietly, "even if they don't see it now. Especially if they don't." I nodded, though I hadn't even shared the full extent of the story with her. "You are welcome to stay for as long as you need," she added. "This house may be modest, but it has ample space for people who truly see each other." I didn't cry. I simply gazed at the stars, and for the first time, I felt as though they were gazing back at me, not merely through me. Over the subsequent weeks, I assisted with whatever I could: grocery runs, cooking, laundry. I took Grandpa for slow, deliberate walks around the block when the weather permitted. He didn't always recall our location, but he consistently held my hand. Sometimes he would call me Rose, other times Lainey, and every now and then, rare and fleeting, he would look at me with clear, unclouded eyes and distinctly say, "Elena." Those moments felt like precious gold dust, tangible proof that a part of him still thrived beneath the encroaching fog. At night, I began journaling, not for academic assignments, not for therapy, but simply to remember. I meticulously wrote down things Grandpa said, meals June prepared, and cherished moments I never wanted to forget. Because for once, forgetting wasn't solely his fear. It had become mine, too. And I was finally in a place where remembering was not just allowed, but encouraged. A life forged in purposeful spring. The gentle rhythm of life in Holton had enveloped me like a second skin. Each morning, I would awaken before the sun, assist June in preparing oatmeal, and sit with Grandpa as he slowly stirred his spoon, occasionally forgetting the next step. I would gently remind him, devoid of frustration or shame. And on the good days, he would hum softly while he ate, sometimes even narrating a half-finished story about fishing with his brothers, or the time he accidentally dropped his wedding ring into a loaf of bread and never disclosed it to Grandma. June affectionately began referring to us as the quiet trio. We didn't require much external noise, just simple presence. I enrolled in a part-time nursing assistant course at the local community college, not because I had meticulously planned it, but because something profound within me had shifted. Like a compass finally pointing true north, caring for Grandpa no longer felt like a sacrifice. It felt like an inheritance. One afternoon, June discovered me in the kitchen, engrossed in homework related to dementia patient care. She set down a plate of cornbread and gently remarked, "You know, I believe you were always destined for this." I shook my head in protest. "I'm not strong enough. I cry too easily. I get overwhelmed." She smiled. "And yet, here you are." When my clinical rotation commenced, I started visiting the local memory care unit. Most of the residents didn't recognize me, but when I read aloud, their eyes softened. When I brought Grandpa's old radio and played his beloved jazz station, some of them subtly tapped their fingers to the beat. One woman, Margie, believed I was her daughter every time I entered the room. I never corrected her. I simply sat and listened as she recounted the same story about her wedding day in 1952. Each retelling felt like a fragile thread from a tapestry she desperately feared would unravel. It made me reflect on Grandpa. Even as his memory faded, he still felt. He still reached for my hand, still flinched at loud noises, still smiled at the cheerful sound of birdsong. And perhaps that's the crucial part no one conveys in textbooks. That memory isn't always rooted in fact, it's rooted in feeling. One day, as I wheeled Grandpa into the backyard, he turned to me, unexpectedly lucid. "You're doing well, Lainey," he said, his eyes remarkably bright. "Truly well." I knelt beside him. I wish I could have done more. He slowly shook his head. "You did the one thing that truly mattered. You stayed." That night, I printed the photograph we had taken together at the bus station. Him smiling, bundled in my scarf, eyes gently closed against the sun. I placed it beside my bed, not because he would remember, but because I would. Because this chapter of my life, born from profound pain and fierce defiance, had transformed into something far grander. Not an escape, but a genuine homecoming. Closure and clarity. Morning Grandpa passed. The house was utterly silent. I found him in his familiar chair by the window, his hands resting peacefully on a warm blanket, the radio playing soft jazz in the background. His framed photograph of Grandma remained on the table beside him. His eyes were peacefully closed, his face serene, as if he had simply drifted off mid-story. I didn't cry initially. I simply sat beside him, held his hand, and whispered, "You can rest now. I'll remember the rest for you." We buried him under the stately oak tree behind June's house, his cherished spot. The ceremony was small, attended only by June, a few kind neighbors, and me. I did not invite my parents, not out of anger, but out of absolute clarity. They had not been a part of his final chapter. They had not earned a place in its poignant closing. However, a week later, I returned to Omaha. I felt a need to go back, not for them, but for myself. I rang the doorbell of the house where I had grown up. It appeared smaller somehow, like a stage after the final curtain had fallen. Mom opened the door, her eyes wide with surprise. Elena. She looked as though she hadn't slept in days. Dad stood behind her, arms crossed, but not defiantly, just weary. I heard, she murmured softly, "About your grandfather." I nodded. He passed peacefully, surrounded by people who loved him. She looked down, her hands nervously wringing. "We didn't mean to." "You did," I gently interrupted. "You intended to abandon him at the airport, and you would have done the same to me if I hadn't chosen to deviate from your script." Dad stepped forward. "He didn't remember you most days. It wasn't personal. It was never about what he remembered," I stated calmly. "It was about what I wouldn't forget." I reached into my bag and produced the envelope June had handed me the day before. Grandpa's revised will. A tender letter tucked inside, granting me his life savings, his pension, and a poignant note that read, "To Elena, you were the only one who stayed. My love belongs with you. Keep remembering, Grandpa." I handed it to them without uttering another word. Their expressions shifted, initial shock, then palpable guilt, followed by something far more complex. "I'm not here to argue," I said. "Just to let you know that I'm all right, and that he was too." I turned to depart, but Mom seized my wrist. "Elena, will you come home?" I looked her directly in the eyes. I truly looked, and for the first time, I saw not cruelty, but a profound emptiness. A woman who had constructed her entire life around control, and now stood isolated in its hollow core. "I am home," I replied, "in Holton, with the people who remembered me before I had to earn it." Back in Kansas, I returned to my studies, my patients, and the familiar porch where Grandpa once sat. I initiated a reading circle for children and seniors. I kept the photo of him and me displayed on the wall beside my nursing certificate. And every single night, I whispered to the stars, I never let go, because in choosing him, one chose myself, and that, I knew, would always be enough.